I have this idea. It's kind of a newish sort of study method that I've been doing, I just really wanted to talk about the study method. So I'm going to show it and also just talk about it a little bit. I'll start by showing some stuff first and then talk about it afterwards. So I'm using ChatGPT. I tried to just pull out stuff and put it in PowerPoint so it's a little easier to look at, and so I don't have to comb through hours of chats back and forth to try to find the ones that I actually want to share. So this is what it is. Hopefully it's good enough. But the key is, so this was my initial prompt to ChatGPT. I said, I want assistance with Russian language practice. For each prompt you give me, vary the difficulty and check my responses for correctness and naturalness. Alternate every question. First, give a translation exercise from English to Russian. Keep the Russian natural more than the English. And next, give an open-ended question in Russian. This is actually something I've done before that I found very helpful. I like it because sometimes just free writing, I'm trying not to talk with my hands so it doesn't mess up the camera, but sometimes just free writing is a little mentally taxing. It can be hard just to have any ideas at all come when you're staring at a blank cursor or a blank paper. But you know, this kind of allows me to go back and forth between free writing, which has really helped me think more in the language, versus translating, which is a little easier to get started. It doesn't require that initial feeling like you're starting from nothing, and it also can help for finding some nuance and stuff, which is anyway. So let's see the first translation it gave me. So this is just going to be in Russian. I'm not going to translate it. I don't know if YouTube will have the ability to put captions for what I read in Russian or not, but so this is a first translation here, and the sentence that it wants me to translate is, I didn't expect the meeting to last that long, but in the end it turned out to be more useful than I thought. Okay, and my response is right here. I typed, Я не думал, что встреча прошла бы так долго, но в конце она была намного использованнее, чем я думал. And it corrected. So this, I think, is a really nice feature. It makes it kind of nice for this sort of exercise. It corrected it to Я не думал, что встреча подлится, я не знаю, как произносить это слово, так долго, но в итоге она оказалась гораздо полезнее, чем я ожидал. But, and then, which is nice already, but what's actually even cooler is it offers the specific reasons for the corrections. So I said прослабый, I believe that's, yeah. And it said здесь не нужен условный наклон. I believe it's telling me that I did not need the word we there. It's it's a marker. I don't know. It's a grammatical marker to kind of mark. I don't know if it's conditionals, something, or it might be something slightly different than I have not really formally studied those terms for Russian, so I don't remember which term it is, but it's a marker to change it from a more standard form of the verb. Anyway, it's good enough. So, and it also said, yeah, so then it said the correct word that I should use is pradlitsa. And then the next phrase that it pointed out was намного использований. It said that the form was not correct, and it said I need гораздо полезнее. And anyway, you get the idea. So it offers these detail corrections. And so the next example, I'll show the open-ended example. And I'm going to just say a little bit, most of my language learning career, which has been a long time now, I generally prefer not to translate. I avoid translations, and I've done that most of the time, and I still think that was the right way to go. For me personally, I'm not one of those people that thinks there can be, I think there's groups of brain types or whatever, and if your brain type is like mine, then the advice I have will be more helpful to you. If your brain type is different, maybe it won't be so helpful because people's brains work different. But anyway, so yeah, for me, I really just think that translation can cause more problems than it helps. And what I'm kind of at a place at now, I think that's more true in the beginning. So I'm actually thinking that translating at later stages, especially if you have a language with complicated grammar like Russian, where I can get input all day, every day. And, maybe some people would pick it up. I will not pick it up. I know it. It's not going to happen. I've been studying for a long time. I've had a lot of input, and there's so many things that I just don't pick up unless I drill them when it comes to grammar. And when I say grammar, I want to make sure I include sentence structures, because that's actually one of the harder parts about Russian that I feel was ignored for the way that my path went for learning Russian. I was aware of, the case endings, the verb forms, some of the other grammar nuances, the deriprichatia, I think is it adverbs, or what do they call those in English? I don't think they're participles, whatever those are. Anyway, so, but what actually, since Russian is pretty far from English, you also really have to learn a lot of sentence patterns. That's like, you could use the English sentence structure, but they just don't. And there's a lot of them. And I learned some of them early on, but only a small amount. And I think probably the list would need to be pretty long, actually, for how many of those to learn. If you want to actually produce output that seems closer to a native, or that seems more natural. Anyway, so I'm finding translations are helpful for that as well. So let's move on to the second example, which was an open-ended question. And the question was, как вы думаете, дисциплина – это врожденное качество или навык, который можно развить? Почему? And some of these questions, when I do these, I don't always know all the words. I often know the questions they're asking, or maybe I have a close idea but not 100% accurate, in which case I may just answer it anyway, because who cares if I'm wrong? I'm just practicing with ChatGPT. But sometimes when I don't know, like for this one, I do remember I had to throw it into Google Translate. I could have asked ChatGPT, but sometimes when you take it too far off the train of thought and like the pattern you're doing, then it mixes up the pattern. So I would prefer to either open a new ChatGPT window or just put it in Google. And I didn't know врожденное качество. I've heard that, but to be honest, I can't remember exactly what it was. But anyway, the question was asking something like, is discipline something that's maybe you're born with or you can learn? So it's what I remember from when I looked it up. And my answer, and then also, I should go back. I think it told me to, it told me to do a bunch of stuff that I just didn't listen to because I don't care. Like it said 6 to 8 sentences. I have no interest in writing 6 to 8 sentences. I want these to be like kind of 30-second responses. Anywhere, the translations are shorter, so maybe 5 to 15 seconds. And then the longer questions, I only want to spend 30, maybe 45 seconds on my answer, because I want these to be just rapid fire personally. So I would not have written 6 to 8 sentences. I think I did that to one response in like 5 hours of doing this back and forth. And the next part was actually helpful. I think a good idea. I didn't always listen because sometimes I just didn't feel like doing it. And at first I actually didn't notice that it was there. But it gave me a sentence structure that it wanted me to employ in my response. So here it told me to use the structure с одной стороны and then с другой стороны. And actually, I think that is a good idea. I just didn't even see it at first. And then later on, some of the times, the suggestions were ones that say it was a structure that I'm so familiar with, I don't need to practice. And it just didn't really need to be in my response the way I was thinking through the response. So, So, and my response, which is like one sentence, and sorry, the text got small. I didn't want to spend a lot of time formatting all this. So, it's like, good thoughts. And then here's my response. It repeats my response. I didn't paste my original things to be redundant. So it repeated my response, which was дисциплина. That was horrible. Навык, который можно развить. Я это знаю, потому что У детях часто нет дисциплины, но когда они вырастут, они ее развивают. And then it gives like a polished, clean version. Sometimes it gives multiple ways of responding. I think it did that more for the translations. I definitely prefer that. I like that a lot, actually, because sometimes one will use forms or vocabulary, like a little too many different forms or vocabulary words that I don't actually know to make it that useful of a correction. And then there'll be a second one that only used one or two words that I didn't know. And then that one's more meaningful to me as a correction. So, so here was the correction. It offered дисциплина – это навык, который можно развить. Я так считаю, потому что у детей часто нет дисциплины, но когда они вырастают, они постепенно ее развивают. And then same thing again, it offers some kind of details about why the corrections are there, which are also really helpful. But I want to move on from that. So third example, this was a translation. And the more responsibility a person has, the more self-discipline becomes. That's not even English. The more responsibility a person has, the more important self-discipline becomes. Okay. And then I actually put this one here as an example just to show that, I don't know, to me this is obvious, but maybe this isn't obvious to everyone. I mean, ChatGPT is not my homework, right? So I'm just using this for my personal study. Sometimes I'll give it like a theme that I want to work around, but because, I'm not new to using ChatGPT, it kind of remembers my interests anyway, which helps. So, I just said I'm kind of bored of this topic. Let's move on to something else. I don't want to sit there and keep translating sentences that I'm not interested in knowing how to say. I could have given it a specific topic. I don't think I did. Actually, I just asked it to change it and then hoped for the best. So it gave me a new one. It said, technology has made our lives more convenient, but it has also made it harder to focus. Which is really that's a lot of vocabulary I would like to learn, is to be able to actually talk about tech, because I like tech. This was a pretty good one. Again, my response originally was технология позволила нашей жизни легче, но также позволь фокус труднее. A little surprised I said that actually, but anyway, then it replied, it corrected that to технологии сделали нашу жизнь удобнее, но также усложнили концентрацию. And once again, it gave the details about why, which is really nice. So then after this, I had a really interesting idea, because as I was going back and forth through a lot of these examples, I did this for like 5 hours yesterday and then sort of did it today. Today, actually, what I decided to do was a number of the translations had forms that I really want to know or feel like I should know, or just there's certain parts of grammar. So when I get to this next part, I did, let's see, I'm starting to confuse it. So my, what I did today was I worked on making flashcards for the examples. And generally I've tried to keep English off my flashcards, or prefer not to translate. I still really prefer not to translate from Russian to English. And I just think it's very easy for me to think in English, and my brain will probably be lazy and find it easier to just literally filter everything that comes at me in Russian into English. And that is not something that I want to happen, and I want to avoid that trap. So that's why I really try not to, other than, I look up a word here and there, but I don't ever try to memorize translations, like where I keep seeing it repeatedly and trying to think of the English. I try to avoid that. So, but I found that thinking the other way doesn't hurt me too much. Sometimes it actually helps me, because my brain's like, wow, this is hard. I'm just going to try to think in Russian instead. I've actually found that to happen before. So, anyway, so that's what I'm working on now. I'm working on making some flashcards then from these example sentences. I picked out the ones that I liked. So as I started to go through those other sentences, I noticed towards the end it started to label them. It would be like, oh, good, this was a B1 sentence, or oh, this was a B2 sentence. I don't know that they're right. I don't even care that they're right. The important thing is I do think they're probably reflecting whether one sentence was more difficult than another. That's actually what I am looking at it as. Personally, I think that the A, B, C ratings are kind of stupid. I also think they're particularly frustrating in Russian because I think that the ratings are based on the sequence they expect you to learn it in school, but I think it's actually very much not the sequence you would learn it if you were just naturally learning the language. I think a lot of the grammar comes much later naturally. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my opinion. So anyway, let's see. Yeah, so I asked it to go ahead and give me, did I do it right here? Yeah, so I said, yeah, I like these translations. Now let's work through some A1 level translations. So for quite a while, I had to go through A1 level translations. Again, it's not important really whether they are actually A1 level or not. The important thing is they're easier. And then after a while, I had it switch to A2. Then after a while, B1. I think that is as far as I made it so far. I'll keep going. I'm curious to see where it'll go in terms of difficulty. So my first A1 translation, I drink coffee every morning, which I actually did bad on the A1 ones, which surprised me. I can think of a few different reasons for that, but I said, "Я пью кофе каждым утром." I used the wrong case. I'm really bad with time in Russian, but I don't put much effort into fixing it because I'm naturally bad at time in English, so I didn't want to waste my efforts there. But "Я пью кофе каждое утро." And yeah, so there was my A1. And then, I did a whole ton of these, but I'm moving on to A2 now just for the examples. I only have a few more examples I want to go over. And, but I did have a really interesting thought. So when I did the A1, I actually did pretty bad on those. Then when I did A2, I did very good on those. I got most of them correct, or the mistakes I made were like more minor than the mistakes I made in A1. And then B1, I felt like I didn't do worse in B1 than I did in A1, so that was very interesting. I can think of two different reasons for that. I'm not sure which one's true. These are just the ideas that popped into my head. So one of them is, I've been studying Russian for a very long time. I've actually been studying for 14 years. And, I don't know, to me that's makes me feel bad when I say that out loud because of where my level's at, but I've done other things the whole time. This isn't something I've been able to devote to. It has nothing to do with my livelihood. It's just not something that I've had a lot of time to devote to most of that time. But anyway, so I have a theory that I may have just forgotten a lot of the stuff that I learned in the A1 level, because those for sure, the things that ChatGPT was giving me that it called A1 were for sure the first things you would come across in a grammar book or in a university course. And I'm wondering if I just forgot a lot of those because it's been so long since I formally studied them, and it's not like they come up that often, some of them, the ones I made mistakes on. That's one theory. The other theory that I thought was kind of interesting. So I studied Russian on my own for quite a while. And then I studied formally in a university for about a year. And then I studied on my own again. And my thought is when I started formally studying, I skipped the formal instruction for what would be the A1 level. And I actually wonder if that could be the reason too, which would be very interesting to me. I'm not sure if that's the reason, but I don't know, it's possible. Because the A2, I nailed it, and that would be about the level of the grammar where I started my formal study. But anyway, so this A2 sentence, supposedly, that it gave me is, when I have free time, I like to read books. And once again, it's not important whether it's A1 or A2. This is clearly slightly longer and presumably more difficult than the previous example. That's really the point. And I actually forgot to put my answer for that one, so I don't have that. But the next one I got for A2 was I forgot to bring my notebook to class today. And I said, "Я забыл взять свой тетрадь в урок сегодня." And I think the only thing I got wrong there was the article. Я забыл взять свою тетрадь на урок сегодня. So that was what I messed up there. And then it just goes over the details. Oh, and I messed up the spelling as well of the word тетрадь. So that was my 7th. I've only got, I think, 9 of these examples, so I'm almost done. This was even more explanation, which sometimes the explanations were long and nice. So this gives me some more usage examples. So I think I actually also messed up the form of the pronoun there. I said svoj, but it should be feminine, so it should be svoju. And then also when I messed up the preposition, it gave me examples. So, na urok, na занятие, на лекцию. It gave me other examples too. Я иду на урок, он опоздал на лекцию. Those are very helpful, and I really like that it did that. And it didn't do that as much when it was believing that I was going through A1, but it started doing it more later. I'm not sure if that was because the sentences were longer, if it was because of the nature of my mistakes, or who knows what. But I thought that was really cool. So 8th example, this is when I did a whole bunch of A2 for a while, and then it's okay, now give me some B1 sentences. This was one of them that it gave me. Many people believe that learning a language requires a lot of patience. And these are the ones I really wanted to put in my note cards, because a lot of these, I was able to express the thought the way that I would say it and a Russian speaker would understand it, but no Russian speaker would say it that way. And I really was running into that often. I run into that very often. I also practice by writing essays sometimes or dialogues or whatever, and I have the same problem. I speak like an American, and it's not because I'm translating. I actually don't like that. I feel like people might think that, but it's not so much that I'm translating, more than I'm thinking like an American, because I'm not thinking of English words first. I just don't have those structures handy to think like, okay, well, this is the thought. This is the structure that I should use to build that thought into, And like I said, the sentence structure in Russian, it does often follow the same way that I would naturally structure my thought in English, aside from the other grammar, obviously, stuff that you have to throw in there. But just, how do I want to say it? The way that you could do it as close to being literal, but still keeping like the obvious like case endings and stuff like that. So anyway, hopefully that made sense. Sometimes, if I had to guess, just by feels, I would say more than 50% of the time, it does follow like an English thought pattern, or at least an English thought pattern will still sound natural or normal. Even though there may be other ways to express that thought. But a decent chunk of the time, I don't know, 20%, 30%, the way it has to be expressed to sound like the way a native would say it, in a way that is very unintuitive to a native English speaker. Hopefully that was clear. So those sentence structures, I really want to learn a lot more of those. And they teach those as you study. Through a grammar book or whatever, through my courses, they did that. I had 1 or 2 tutors that did things in a more formal, structured way. Most of them didn't, because I prefer not to, so I asked them to just do conversation practice. But I did have one for sure that we went through a grammar book together. And they do those in the grammar book, but they don't do very many of them. Like by the end of it, I don't know what you end up with, 5, 10, 15, but I think you really need like 50, 100 different structures that you have right on the tip of your brain, so that when you're ready to use them, you can throw them out there instead of the way you would want to form it as an English speaker. I think some of these examples say that. And so let's move on. So this was my first B1 translation. Many people believe that learning a language requires a lot of patience. Here was what I said. Много людей верит, что изучением языка можно много терпения. I don't remember where the accent is on that word. And it corrected it to многие люди считают. That was a word I often don't use when ChatGPT recommends using it, and I think is correct. In the past, I've had some of this stuff checked by a native speaker, and it seems like it's usually correct on choosing the right word in the right situation, so I'm assuming that's correct. Многие люди считают, что изучение языка требует большого терпения. And this one really was not so much a new structure, just I messed up my case endings and my word choice here and there. But yeah, I corrected my case endings and my word choice for the verb and my case endings over here as well at the end. So what else did it correct? This is still the corrections. Pretty much nothing new interesting. So my last example, which I hope was one with a structure, I was wanting to show one of those. So after living in the country for several months, I started to feel more comfortable speaking the language. And I said, после того, как я жил в стране несколько месяцев, то я начал чувствовать себя удобнее, говорящая той язык. And it said после того, which honestly, just the fact that I got that would have made me happy because I also really need to learn these connecting words. I found that I'm really bad at using them in English as well, so it's no surprise to me that I have not picked them up in Russian. I actually probably could work with a tutor to improve those in English as well, but после того, как я прожил в стране несколько месяцев, я начал чувствовать себя более уверенно, говоря на этом языке. And this actually was not a great example. So the structure here is pretty close to the way I would naturally structure it as an English speaker. I just messed up more basic grammar stuff. I messed up the verb form when I tried to use the, whichever one this is. I think it's a participle. It'll call it out somewhere in the explanation. I used the wrong verb form here. Anyway, messed up the basic stuff, which means I did not grab an example of a structure, but one that I've been practicing, so I've already made some flashcards of these, was chem, tem, So that's a common structure in Russian. There's some that they learn early that I can't think of off the top of my head right now, but hopefully that's clear enough. So like, yeah, I think it was like, чем больше я изучаю русский язык, тем чем больше я понимаю русский язык. I think I messed that up a little bit, but kind of that idea where it's like this. Well, in English, you could give an example of there's examples in English too. Either or is a good example. Either blah, 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 or blah, 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 blah. So that's like a sentence structure. So that's, hopefully that's kind of clear enough. There's really a lot of those in Russian that are used that are not, they would not come to your mind as an English speaker unless you've seen them. So, and you don't see them very often just coming through input. So I really don't think you can learn them very well that way. But anyway, so yeah, so let's see, it corrected my verb. It took out the word to. I'm not sure if that's necessary, actually. В каких предложениях то обычно не используется? Yeah, the way it worded that, I think it's telling me that it's recommended not to use it. And, well, actually, maybe I'm incorrect because here it's giving this. So this is an example of a sentence structure, I guess. I just didn't think of it that way. But yeah, после того как stuff happens, comma, yeah, the other stuff happens. So this is actually an example of a sentence structure. So ideally, I haven't done it yet, but ideally I would make, so flashcards, like a flashcard with this one is nice. And there's other ways that you can do it besides translating. But for now, I think I'm going to do some translation and just leave it with the English on the one side. And I'm going to try to come up with the Russian. But I'm going to be a little bit lax with how well I produce it on the other side, just because there are a lot of ways to get it incorrect. And for some of them, I've marked off like the parts that I need. Most of them, I just mentally made a note of what I need. But there are a couple where I marked off like this is what has to be there for me to consider it correct. And then ideally what I'll do in the future, because ChatGPT was just giving me like completely disconnected examples. now that I see this as a structure form, pozytowo kak ja, I want to go ahead and come up with several, I don't know, 5 to 10 different sentences that use the same structure but are completely different sentences. And I want to do that for all the different structures that I'm trying to learn. And yeah, so that's my plan. The last part of this slide, there's a part 2 here. I don't think anything new is said, just more mistakes I made that are not too interesting. The verb form was deru pricastia, which again, I forget in English. I think that's a participle, but yeah. So now one last thing I think that's kind of interesting. So I did study in college. I studied Russian for 1 year. My formal grammar study, though, actually came from studying Koine Greek. I spent 3 years studying Koine Greek in Bible college, and it was like 90% grammar. Like we literally would read through an intermediate grammar every Friday for the whole year for, to read through the whole book for my second year Greek class. It was very, very grammar heavy, and I knew all those terms very well for Greek. I'm not sure if I might mess them up some now, but when I came to Russian, I kind of just took my grammar understanding from Greek and transferred it to Russian, which I found has created more problems than I expected. It wasn't like bad for my learning, but it definitely, that's why I can never remember the terms. Like, what is that thing called? Is that a participle? I don't know, because in Greek they had participles, but yeah, so anyway, then I studied Russian on my own for quite a while, where I really didn't focus on grammar. I focused really heavily on, I used Rosetta Stone, I used Pimsleur, I used tutors, but I actually didn't use real tutors. I had friends that I had help me. I had them help me with accent. I had them just very informally assist me, and that's what I wanted, and that's what I asked them to do. And then after studying for a while, I formally studied Russian for 1 year in college. And I had 2 different professors. And like I said, I skipped the first year. So probably the first A1. I forget how much of the book it was that I had skipped. But anyway, I had 2 semesters. And the professors were very interesting. They were very different. They were very different in their approach. Everything about them was as different as it could be. So the first one was an American man who learned Russian as a second language. He was the head of the program, and he spoke Russian very well, but it was his second language. The woman was from Russia, and her English was not good. And yeah, so they're just different people-wise. Actually, personalities, they were completely opposite too. But what's more important is their methods were completely different. So the American professor used, a modern language learning American textbook that followed what I feel is a pretty standard way of wanting to approach things in modern times, learning a modern language. Very little translation. Translation was minimized as much as possible. Lots of dialogues, there were some drills for grammar, but lots of examples, lots of pictures, lots of like just weird group activity kind of exercises. I don't mean that in a bad way. I liked them, but just I don't know how to summarize it. And so what's interesting is I do know that you can learn these structures without translation. And the way they did it in that book and the way we did it in class would be like they give you an example and then they have you change it. So they'd be like, here's this sentence that doesn't follow this pattern. Now make it follow this pattern. My problem though with that, it does help, but my problem is you kind of always are already prompted with the pattern that you're supposed to produce, and I never feel like I'm actually producing it from nothing. So that's why I'm not going to go that way with my flashcards. Another way that I've tried to do it is by doing like a closed deletion, fill in the blank type, where I will leave, maybe several words out of it or something. My problem there is it still just does not feel the same as producing speech from nothing. So I want to give these translations a try. And so far I'm finding that they are helpful. I'm not sure yet if they're messing up my ability to think in Russian. They are definitely a lot harder. It makes going through the flashcards a lot less pleasant. So I could go through a lot less of them in a day. But yeah, that's where I'm at. and then just to finish that little story there, the native Russian speaker, the way she did things, I'm sure we did more than this, but the thing that stood out to me the most, and I know that this was a big part of her focus, was we would sit in a group, like in a circle, and people would go around, and she would be like, she would just have people translate things. She would give you something in English and have you translate it into Russian. And we would kind of just go around the room translating like that. And so even during that process, I did notice that it was really forcing me to pay attention to the grammar when I do that and use the actual correct grammatical forms. So anyway, yeah, there's this method. Hopefully some of that can be helpful if you're studying a language. I really like doing it. I really like it as an addition. I do think so. Okay, one more short thing. I'm almost done. So I did ask ChatGPT. I couldn't sleep last night. I keep thinking about this, and I don't know where else to go. So I tried to look on YouTube and stuff. I don't have time to sit there and search Reddit much more. So I just kind of asked ChatGPT in a way that I was hoping wouldn't steer it to just agree with me. But whether it did or not, it also seemed to think the same thing, that translation can be more hindersome in the early stages of learning a specific language, and then more helpful later on as a way to gain nuance, really hammer down certain grammar structures, things like that. So I don't know. It seemed to agree. Then I asked my tutor about it today, and my tutor seemed to disagree, but I didn't get much of an explanation about why. So I'm not actually sure which part of what I was saying they were disagreeing with. Maybe we agree. Maybe we would have agreed more if we could have worked out the details. I'm not exactly sure there, but anyway, hopefully that helps. Give it a try. See what you think.